Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shin Kim. I'm teaching history of Israel. Uh, every actually class, I start with this chart. Actually, this is a short actually summary of the whole history of Israel, especially written in the Old Testament. We already actually see this actually time paradigm several times. You must remember this one. This is one of the important actually time period. BC 1800 actually Abraham left Uru in Mesopotamia, and Abraham actually become the father, the ancestor of Israel. And BC 1800 through 1200, that around 600 years actually called age of patriarchy, actually Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And at the time of Jacob, actually they went to the Egypt, and they stay in Egypt over 400 years, especially as a slave. And by the leadership of Moses, actually Israel people actually in Egypt, they escape from Egypt and they finally go into the land of Canaan. So the Exodus story is one of the important actually events throughout the whole history of Israel. And BC 1200 through 1000, that era called actually Age of Judges. And the first actually judge was Joshua, and the last actually judge is Samuel. And at the era of the Samuel Judge Samuel, actually Israel people asking, give us king, give us king. They ask that. So that is a starting point of a united kingdom. And the first king called Saul, and the second king called King David. And today I'm gonna dealing with King Solomon. And throughout the whole history of the Israel, three main figures, three most important persons are Abraham, Moses, and David. And BC 920, unfortunately, United Kingdom was divided two parts, northern part and the southern part. Northern part called Israel, southern part called Judea. And almost around 300 years actually called period of two kingdom. Northern part, southern part exist. But BC 712, Assyria Empire actually invade Israel and the fall of Israel. Northern part of the Israel was disappeared, and alone only southern part called Judea was at that time was survived. And but BC 586, finally southern part, even Judea was invaded by the Babylonian Empire. Actually, it was also totally destroyed. And unfortunately, after that, the nation of Israel was disappeared from the map, from the history. Actually, this is the whole history written in Old Testament. So that's why you must remember this one. So already I mentioned about three important person. Abraham, already talking about also Moses, Exodus story, and through the previous class, I'm dealing with David, King David, and these three person, they actually still they are still remembered by Israel, not only by the Israel people, but also many Christian actually esteemed. They respect Abraham, Moses, and King David. And today, topic is King Solomon. Around he was in the throne for over around 40 years. And Solomon actually he was the son of Bathsheba. Maybe through the previous class, actually you maybe remember. Actually, unfortunately, King David made a great sin. Actually, he has a friend called Uriah, and Uriah was a great actually general, and he sent him to the border before for the war. And during that time, actually, he has adultery. He has adultery with Uriah's his best friend's wife, and but ironically, actually through Bathsheba, actually King Solomon was born, and Solomon actually acceded the throne. He became the king, and he killed his older brother Adoniah. And even though actually Solomon was not actually he was not born through the wife, actual real wife of King David. It looks like a concubine of King Solomon called Bathsheba. She was already has husbands, but actually King David killed Bathsheba's husbands in the war field, and his son called Solomon actually become the actually kings. And but King Solomon is also he was a great general. He can actually control his army, and he also showed a great political leadership. So King actually Solomon consolidated his armies and the political faction. So through under his leadership, actually the nation Israel had been greatly improved, and in many parts. And he was actually influential king throughout that area. So also he made the cultural and the economic development. So in many actually nation, most actually countries around Israel at that time, they heard of King Solomon, and he is extremely wise, and he is extremely good in politics, and many actually nation esteemed the nation of Israel because of him. And King Solomon actually he established the administrative district with government officials. So actually he organized the whole nation of Israel, and make a distinction to each other and appoint some official. Like the United States actually is composed of the 50 states. Each actually state has their own governor. So it seems like that kind of a system. So King Solomon was extremely wise, and he knows about the politics, and he knows how to rule over the whole nation of Israel. As also he was extremely good actually relationship with also other country. And he also modernized the military, the army with horse and the chariot. So it seems like he already actually he already trained the army like the Roman army system. He already know about that. And also during the reign of King Solomon, actually increased the trade, a lot of communication with other countries. So many actually other nations king wanted to see King Solomon, and they provide some good to actually King Solomon, and that's why. And he also set up it looks like a modern tax also system. Usually a nation, the concept of a nation is need tax, okay? Also, every nation has army system. So, in the time of King Solomon, Israel actually has modernized and developed the system of army and also tax system. So that's actually proved that King Solomon was one of the greatest actually kings throughout the Israel history. And usually King Solomon actually even you are not a Christian and never go to the church, never heard, you never read about the Bible story, but you heard of his name, King Solomon. He is because he is the wisest king ever. So one day actually God actually appeared before actually Solomon, and God talked to the Solomon. Solomon, what can I do for you? What do you want from me? Actually, God asked the question to King Solomon. At the time, King Solomon prayed for the wisdom. Give me the wisdom. What do you want from God personally? If God appeared before you and God asking to you, okay, what can I do for you? What do you wish? If God asks a question to you, what do you actually want to ask to Him? Money, long life, success, something like that. Okay, I give a green card, maybe. But even though he can request other things, but Solomon prayed for wisdom. Give me the wisdom. I want to rule God's people with justice and know the difference between good and evil. Give me the wisdom. And God was astonished. He was puzzled. He was touched by the answer of King Solomon. So that's why God gave King Solomon not only wisdom, but also riches and honor. So that's why during the era of King Solomon, he has extremely vast, large land, and many actually kings, queens actually wanted to see him, and he has a lot of actually at the time rich like Bill Gates, or he was extremely super riches at the time, and he actually displays his wisdom by judging a case between two women arguing over who was a baby's real mother. Maybe you had heard of this story. Look at the picture. Actually, there were two women, okay? Two women. Almost at the same time, they delivered a baby. But unfortunately, one baby died. And the next day, maybe other woman still another woman's baby. And the next morning, she wake up, she recognized her baby was disappeared, and suddenly the neighbor's woman has her baby. So they arguing, this baby belong to me, this baby is mine, and but nobody know about what is the truth. So that's why they coming to King Solomon, and this baby is mine, this baby is mine. They keep asking. So in that case, what can you do you say for that? How can you judge about that issue? If it is modern day, there will be actually DNA test. It is easy case, but just imagine that almost 3,000 years ago. At the time, there was no scientific development. There was no DNA test. What can you judge about that issue? And after listening to actually two women's story, actually King Solomon finally judged like this. Okay, uh, cut the baby in half, and the half you gonna hold it, and another woman also you can have the body of 50% of the body of the baby. Actually, okay, bring the knife, bring the sword, cut the baby in half, and he judged like that. And one woman say that, okay, give me the 50% of the body of the baby. I don't care. Give me 50% of the body. But another woman, no, 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 no. You cannot kill my baby. Okay, I will give my baby to her. Please let my baby survive. Please let my baby alive. And as soon as actually King Solomon heard two women just a different story, and he recognized that the real mother actually didn't want her baby to die. So he can actually figure it out. And after this event, everybody actually respect King Solomon's wisdom. And it is extremely actually famous story written in the Bible. And even maybe, even though I didn't explain about this actual case, maybe you already know about that issue. And also, King Solomon actually he supposedly wrote many Old Testament books, including Songs of Songs and Ecclesiastes and Proverbs. Maybe these three books actually is estimate actually for King Solomon to write that books. So he even actually he even writer of the Old Testament. That kinds of wisdom actually he has. Still, in modern day, if we see some baby is extremely genius, we say that he has King Solomon's wisdom. We say that even several thousand years later. And through the reign of King Solomon, actually look at the map. Actually, previous green part was actually the first area of King Saul's reign. At the time, even though King Solomon actually become the king of nation of Israel, that area actually that nation land is extremely small. But by the conquer of the King David, actually King David extended the territory of the Israel, and King Solomon actually succeeded his father's land. So it's extended to the north, even the east, and even to the south area. So that actually huge area, King Solomon reigned and ruled over it wisely. And usually it is said that there were also another two big actually contribution over King Solomon. The first one is actually temple. Temple actually is the center of the religious center of Judaism. And King David actually he really wanted to build a temple, but as you know, King David actually he involved so many war and he killed so many persons' life, and his whole body was covered with blood because he was a great general. So God prohibited actually for King David to build a temple. And that actually things actually succeeded to King Solomon. So by the era of King Solomon, finally he built the temple. And the construction of the temple took 7 years. Even in modern day, unfortunately, there is no actually temple because it was totally destroyed. But it was a huge actually building, and it takes actually several years actually works. And the temple was built in BC around 1958, and or it was totally actually after 480 years after the Exodus. Exodus long time ago by the leadership of Moses, and actually around 5 years later, finally the Israel built the temple of God, and especially in Jerusalem. But usually actually the temple previously the first temple was made by Moses actually. At the time they are wanderers in the desert. That means they raising sheep and they moving around, and they cannot build. They could not build the temple with the stone because they keep moving. Okay, they stay here, this place, maybe for 1 week. Next week they move to another mountain, and 1 month later they move to another area. So they cannot build the temple. Only they made a tent temple. So next day they actually moving this tent to other place. and also temple is the place for the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark is located the holy and holy place. And Hebrew built the temple of Yahweh, the national and the spiritual center of the Jewish people in Jerusalem. Temple was built of great. This is actually, you may see the picture, and this is tent, actually temple. But actually by the King Solomon, actually the temple actually was built of great stone. Because finally the nation of Israel was born, and the nation was stabilized, and that's why. And the interior wall were lined with cedar, one of the wood, expensive wood, and covered with gold leaf. There are a lot of actually metal required in order to establishing the great temple. But unfortunately, exactly at the site of temple of God of Israel, exactly in this site. Look at the photo. Actually, exactly in this site, unfortunately, Islam temple was established exactly on the same site of King Solomon's temple. So only one side of a wall still exists. So that actually wall called Wailing Walls, because that actually wall actually remind the Israel people we lost our country. So Temple Mountain, Wailing Walls. Maybe you may heard of Wailing Walls. Every year, the whole Israel people visit only one side of the wall exists, other three sides destroyed, and as I said, unfortunately, the temple of God was destroyed, and exactly in this site is later Islam actually occupied the city of Jerusalem, and they established Islamic actually temple on that site. So golden actually dome temple. So temple was destroyed by the Babylonian in 586. One time it was totally destroyed, and later actually Israel rebuilt temple of God again in 516 BC, and that also temple was also destroyed again in 70 AD. Actually, it's not BC. Sorry, I make a mistake. 70 AD by the Roman Empire. So the temple of God actually has a long actually relationship with in the history of Israel, and by the king of Solomon, finally they built the temple with stone, but as I said, unfortunately all of the stone was destroyed. And after establishing the temple of God, another actually great construction called actually King Solomon's palace, it was also established. Look at the picture, because there still also this actually King Solomon's palace was also destroyed and no longer exists in modern day. But according to the Bible and many historical actually documents, they actually drawing this actually King Solomon's palace. It was extremely huge actually building construction with maybe over thousands of rooms. It was a huge one. And the Solomon's palace, actually Solomon took 13 years. Previously around 6 or 7 years construction for the temple of God, but unfortunately King Solomon actually tried to make his palace enlarge, and that actually takes 13 years to construct his palace. And King Solomon's building and the luxury was supported by tributes and heavy tax on the Israelites. Just imagine that. Yeah, whenever there was big construction, who worked for them? Actually, people. Okay, people of the nation. They should provide free labor, unfortunately. So even though, yeah, King Solomon, he was wise, but he has personal ambition, and he actually wanted to pick his actually palace. And Solomon's activity brought magnificence to the Israel, but also his actually two big construction. Number one is actually temple of God. Number two is palace. Actually, it loses this content. Many people complain about that. Israelites in the north actually resented the heavy taxes. They, oh my God, yeah, even in United States, everybody actually getting job, and when they get paid at the time, they should pay tax. Maybe around 20, maybe single person 40% of tax. It is very high. But also during the reign of King Solomon, he needed two big construction, he needed a lot of money, and also in order to actually conserve the big building, he needed another money. That's why he actually, because of that reason, Israel people actually, they paid a lot of heavy tax. So that actually related to the corruption of Israel. And as soon as King Solomon died, because of a big tax and also heavy labor, because of that reason, actually United Kingdom was divided to section because of this reason. And even the prophet objected to the instruction of the worship of foreign god concubine. Little bit later, I'm talking about King Solomon has too many wives, 700 wives. He has 700 wives. That's why he need a lot of a big palace. Can you imagine that he has 700 wives? But not only 700, another 300 concubines. So total his women are 1,000. 4,000 women, 1,000 wives. He need 1,000 separate room. That's why his palace was extremely big. And Solomon had a reputation for wisdom and composed many proverbs, but his later politics policies were not wise. Unfortunately, when he accepting one wife, and that wife actually bring her one religion, and a little bit later Solomon forget about God who gave him wisdom. He forget about the God, okay? He forget about God of Israel, and he start worshiping other God that those his actually wife actually brought to Israel. So later, unfortunately, King Solomon become the worshiper of other God. So that's going to be another disaster in the history of Israel. As I said, look at the painting, King Solomon, and he was covered with so many women's 700 wives. Can you remember the full name of 700 women's name? But 700 women are not his daughter. 700 women are his wife, and he had another 300 concubines. Not actually real wife, but 300 women actually belong to him. So even he married the daughter of Egyptian Pharaoh for political reason. So maybe there was some political reason. So within every nation, he wanted to have a good relationship. So one of the best way to have a good relationship with other nation is married to the daughter of that king, okay, that nation's king. That's why he has so many wives. But also maybe his personal ambition. So he has total 1,000 actually women in his palace, and that's actually starting point of his corruption. and he was extremely rich. And as soon as a person has the power and women and money, and he stopped actually forgetting about the real God, and he starting following his personal actually ambition. Unfortunately, whenever you have a success and you stop forgetting about God and you rely on your one power, you're gonna rely on your money, you're gonna rely on your knowledge. That's the actually starting points of a disaster. And even though he was recorded one of the wisest king, but the people of Israel, they have extremely hard time under Solomon's rule. And many Israel people hate his rule because of number one, high tax for the building, and for the wife supporting for the wives 1,000 women. And number two is making young men work in the army. That means he brought so many daughters. He took so many daughters of Israel. He took so many sons of Israel for his army. And it looks like Israel people lost their daughters and sons because of King Solomon. Even though his starting point was extremely good, because he not asking money, fame, but he asking wisdom to rule over the Israel. But later and later, and he start relying on himself, and that's the actually starting of a tragic, actually starting of a disaster in the history of Israel. So as soon as he died, unfortunately, the nation was divided two parts. And your homework going to be reading the book of First King Solomon, chapter 3 through 27, or you may watch the movie. It is a good movie, so maybe you can watch the movie. Thank you for listening to my lecture, and see you next time. Thank you.